Here's my Wijk aan Zee round 9 game of the day, and it's between Magnus Carlsen with white against Teimour Radjabov. Now Carlsen has a pretty good record in classical chess against Radjabov, but he did lose to him in Shamkir 2014, so an opponent not to be underestimated. Radjabov is a pretty good technical player. He played the Berlin defence, and Carlsen kept the tension by protecting his e-pawn with 4d3. He didn't go into the Berlin Wall endgame, and I think against Radjabov that's a good decision. And well, we join the game after 18 moves, and it's a very complex position. Most of the pieces on the board. You can see that Radjabov's pawn structure has been damaged. Carlsen exchanged on c6, but Radjabov has the two bishops. He's just played his knight to f8. A very common manoeuvre in this system. Sometimes the knight can come out via e6 to one of these outposts, sometimes to g6. Carlsen played bishop e3. He's so good at posing awkward questions for his opponent. And Radjabov with black here has such a big choice, and it's very difficult to determine what the best move is. Well, first, he certainly doesn't want to take here because the exchange of bishops leaves this square weak. This bishop isn't very good on its own. Not a good move. What about knight e6? Now that's complicated. That's the move I think black would like to play, but probably white can get away with knight takes e5. There are some tactics after knight d4, but should be good for white. There's also knight g6. It's the move black would like to play, and perhaps knight f4, but then c5 locks in that bishop. But that's not completely clear, but probably not good. This bishop d4, that's an interesting move. Followed by c5. Now that potentially is a good move, but what happens after this? White has a nice kingside pawn majority. After this move, this pawn is looking, well, slightly isolated. Is that a strength or a weakness? Very hard to determine. In the end, Radjabov played c5. Now that is a really ambitious move. First glance, it looks absolutely daft because it means this bishop is locked in on b6. It's just a big pawn. But if black has time to get in knight e6 to d4, that knight will probably have to be exchanged off, and then that bishop actually starts to come into the game via c5. There's also the chance sometimes to play the pawn forward to a4, and in that way to free the bishop. So this is an ambitious move. Now Radjabov played rook d1. Carlsen played rook d1, hitting Radjabov's queen, which moved, and then knight h5, hitting the queen. Queen came back. Now this knight doesn't really do much, so Carlsen started to redeploy it. And yeah, his piece is starting to look a little menacing on the queen side, on the king side. This rather reminds me of his game against Anand from the World Championship match that Carlsen won, game 2 or was it 4? I can't remember. A very nice strategic game where Carlsen attacked on the king side using straight from a Berlin defence. Actually, he managed to swing a rook over on the third rank. Well, we'll see about that a little bit later. But here I'm sure that black is okay. Perhaps Radjabov should play a4 here to free this bishop and gain some counterplay with the rook on the a file. But instead he started using up time, and he played a little nervously, king h7. He was perhaps worried about potential sacrifices here. Queen f3 from Carlsen, and again there is sort of pressure mounting here. Sometimes this might be a theme, sometimes queen g3. Again, I think a4 is okay for black, but instead Radjabov played f6, which looks a bit funny to me. Weakening these squares a little bit. So knight g4 from Carlsen, and now there is a serious threat to take here. So this was exchanged off, and it's interesting, Carlsen spent precisely 8 seconds over his next move, which was queen takes bishop. Could also play this. Highly plausible move, but I just find it noteworthy that Carlsen makes these big strategic decisions very quickly. It shows such confidence. Now probably black should expel this knight from its strong position, but perhaps Radjabov was worried about weakening his second rank and weakening this h-pawn as well. Instead he played rook d8, which doesn't seem too bad, but queen f5 check is a good move. If g6 then f6 hangs, so the king goes back. Now, yeah, this is an excellent move. f4 lines are starting to open up on the king side, and so black is going to have to defend on the king side. Meanwhile, this bishop is still completely stuck on b6. Black needs to take time to play a4, but he just doesn't have that time at the moment. Radjabov exchanged off rooks, and then he needs to exchange off on f4 because he can't really contemplate allowing white to isolate that pawn. So he exchanged, and bishop takes. And now white has the idea of playing e5, and after the pawn exchange, where you can see white's bishop would cut down to g7, and that's looking very, very powerful. So Radjabov played queen e6. By this stage he's running really short of time actually. Even though players get 30 seconds increment per move, it's still serious time pressure. Now queen e6 doesn't look bad because it's as though it's checkmating white's queen on f5. And after the queen exchange, well then finally black might have time to play a4 and free this bishop. But Carlsen came up with an excellent idea, rook d3. And yes, this reminds me of his game against Anand from the World Championship, where he managed to swing this rook over to g3, and out of nowhere it seems as though white has a very strong attack. First of all, we should say that this endgame is very promising for white. You can see that it's not just that bishop on b6, which is a dreadful piece. It's that knight on f8 as well, dominated by white's pawn here. And white is in total control there. All his pieces stand well. In fact, this knight could perhaps swing round via f4 to d5, or maybe just back here, perhaps king f2. I mean, white is in total control. So I can understand why Radjabov didn't want to do that, but instead he played rook e8. But when you're short of time, it's easy to miss what white's idea was. So Radjabov was trying to put pressure here, but unfortunately knight takes g7 is a very powerful blow. And again, very impressive that Carlsen saw this idea so quickly. Now, if queen takes queen, then this is going to be a winning endgame for white. Radjabov took the knight, but now it's lost. Carlsen finds a series of only moves. Well, I think once you get to this situation, one would probably find these moves, but actually to foresee everything so quickly was still impressive from Carlsen. So, h6 threatened, and rook g3. If knight g6, queen h6 is going to force, mate very soon actually. So knight h7. Bishop h6 check, only move. King has to go back into the corner. Queen g6, only move to win. Now, let's see some variations. If rook g8, then rook d8 forces a win. That's nice. Obviously, if the rook is taken, then queen g7 mate. And if queen e7, that's pretty easy. Rook g3, followed by bishop g7, and that knight just gets exchanged off and white wins that one. Radjabov played queen g8, and now again only move to win. Bishop g7 check, forcing the win of the rook on e8. Now with this bishop entombed on b6, then the endgame is going to be very good for white. But the simplest thing to do is keep the queens on, because white keeps the attack on the king, and this really is very simple. There is absolutely no defence. Now e5, position is opening up, and Radjabov played a couple of checks on f4, and after rook g3 he resigned. Queen g8, mate is threatened, and there's not really much that black can do about that. So a really impressive performance by Carlsen again. That's now 6 wins in a row. He's so good at these strategically complex middle games. Radjabov, well, somehow Carlsen now has a winning aura about him. I think Radjabov played a very hesitant game today, but still, it was an impressive game from Carlsen. So that's 6 in a row. Scores after 9 rounds. Carlsen has 7 out of 9. Wesley So and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave have 6, so there's a point clear. Carlsen is a point clear. And Ding and Ivanchuk have 5.5. Ding Liren lost to Geary today, so he falls behind. Tomorrow, Carlsen plays Ivanchuk. That'll be interesting to see.